Should be coming through now on YouTube. Just give it a couple more minutes, and just concerned that we won't be able to read what's on the page. Yeah, that's not very good. Oh well. We'll have to make do with this. Yeah, you might not be able to read. But let's see once the presentation comes about. So welcome everybody. Today we'll be talking about, have I been lacking some discernment lately, guidelines to self-awareness. And we usually start with a text, and we'll start with the text called Prodigal Sons from the book Our Daily Bread. And I apologize that you can't read it, but I'll try to make it better for next time. So, Prodigal Sons. And this is a book from Chico Xavier through the Spirit Emmanuel, and he talks about a passage from Luke in chapter 15 when he says, when he comes to his senses, he said, many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death. And Emmanuel's description talks about, upon visualizing the figure of the prodigal son, all the people idealized him to the man of wealth, dissipating material possibilities and feasts of the world. But the vision should be enlarged, comprising all the different mannerisms. The prodigal sons do not solely breathe where wealth is found in abundance. They're found in all areas of human activities, slipping in diverse forms. Some great scientists on Earth are reckless with their intelligence, dispersing intellectual poisonous thoughts unworthy of the privilege they were endowed. Marvelous artists sometimes waste their imagination and sensibility uselessly through insidious, miserly ventures, finally falling into the idle pursuit of relaxation and of crime. All over we see these dissipators of wealth, knowledge, time, health, and opportunities. It is them who, upon contemplating those with simple, humble hearts, marching toward God, possessed of true faith, go through the great anxiety of uselessness, and afar from the intimate peace, hopelessly explain. How many simple laborers possess the bread of tranquility, while the hunger for peace tortures the spirit? The world remains replete with prodigal sons, and hourly thousands of voices repeat these same painful exclamations. So let us pray. Let's close our eyes and think about our Master Jesus, elevating our thoughts to our older brother, to the brother who came here to teach us a little bit more about love, to teach us how important it is to love ourselves and to love our brothers and to love God above all. Today, Master, we will be talking about discernment, about self-awareness, about this pursuit that we have towards getting to know the most precious thing we have, our immortal spirits. And through that, we hope to inspire some reflections to help each and every one of us to reflect about self-awareness, to reflect about the power that lies within us, the power that lies within the divine in us. So please, God, help us again, one more day, one more time. Look at ourselves with love, with peace. So be it. Thank you all, and I'm happy to see you all here. Just going to see if there are any comments. Good morning, Sonia. Good morning, Renata. And just to reiterate what I had said before, today, unfortunately, we don't have the little title block on the bottom, but this is the title of our presentation as you're seeing on the screen. And good morning, Malcolm. Happy to see you here. And so we'll start. And if there are any issues, you can just post a comment, and I'll try to address them as we go. So our talk is based on the SAFE guidelines to self-awareness, and especially on some video lectures that Alida Sequeira from the Federation, the Spiritist Federation in Brazil, was bringing to us, and he was able to bring us 12 video lectures, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we're going to split them. And we also have a passage from the Gospel of Luke, and a lot of text from a book called Conscience Moments from Joana de Angelis. And so, like I said, Alida provided us with 12 video lectures on self-conscious, self-awareness, and we'll split that into 6 throughout the year. We've already done our first one, and today we'll be doing our second, called self-awareness, the conscientious duty, and discernment. So those are the 2 topics that we'll be talking about today. Our conscientious duty and discernment, and how those 2 virtues relate with self-awareness. So the initial reflection that we usually start with, where I invite you to just close your eyes and reflect a little bit. And this goes on: do I reflect about my self-conscious, my conscientious duty, how we call it here? And then the second one is, have I been lacking some discernment lately? And then the third one is, do I pray? And if I do pray, why? Why am I praying? Why do I look for when I pray? So we'll start by first talking about what's the purpose of self-awareness. Why even bother with it, really? And it goes back to something that Jesus told us in John chapter 8, when he said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." So what truth was Jesus talking about, right? Since our goal is to be free, right? Is to evolve ourselves as immortal spirits. So what is the truth, right? And we've talked a little bit about this last time. There's 2, right? You have the divine truth, which are the divine laws, which lie in our conscience, in the gospel of Jesus, in the Spiritist doctrine. But there's also the internal truth. And the internal truth, that is our truth. That is what we bring within ourselves, without trying to hide anything, without any masks, right? It's our virtues and our ignorances, our ego, both evident and masked, right? So basically an open book, right? Trying to understand who we truly are. And that's the biggest thing about self-awareness, right? It's going within, is being aware of our internal truth. And then we ask ourselves, why? Right? Why do I need to know about myself? Well, if our goal is to evolve, if our goal is to improve, how can I improve something that I don't know? Right? If I think about a car that's broken, or a car that needs some improvement, if I don't know about cars, if I don't know about engines, I can't really fix it, right? I can't really improve it. So if you bring that to ourselves, if I don't know myself, if I don't understand who I am, what are my bad inclinations, what are my virtues that are requiring some polishing, right? If I don't understand, if I don't know about myself, I can't improve myself. And that's why self-awareness is so important, right? Because it's what will provide us with that knowledge, with that internal truth that we think is easy. But there's a lot about us that we don't know. Because as we know, we are still led a lot by our ego. And our ego is simply our ignorance, our lack of knowing, our lack of basically understanding and living love. So as we get to know ourselves better, we can then guide ourselves better. And another passage from Jesus in Matthew, when he tells us, or when he talks about us, when he talks to us about the golden rule, right? Do unto others what you wish would be done unto you. So the self-awareness piece here is very, very important for this passage, because when Jesus says, right, treat others as you wish to be treated, how do I want to be treated? How do I truly want to be treated? What is the treatment that I would like to receive that would motivate my immortal spirit, that would touch my immortal spirit, my essence, right? So again, if I don't know my essence, if I don't know who I am, how can I know how I would like to be treated? So in order for me to be able to action this golden rule, be able to action one of the greatest passages from Christ, is to know myself first, so then I can treat others the way I truly, truly want to be treated. And I want to start talking about bringing a passage from Lazarus from the Gospel according to Spiritism, when he taught us in chapter 17 on a text entitled Duty. Since we are talking about conscientious duty, he brought us a passage saying that duty is an individual's moral obligation, first towards him or herself and towards others immediately thereafter. Duty is the law of life. It is found in the smallest details as well as in the most elevated acts. Right? So here there's a couple of very important passages. First, duty is a moral obligation that we have. First, with ourselves. Right? A duty to evolve ourselves morally. And then towards others, right? To help others also evolve morally. He says that it is the law of life And it is found in the smallest details, as well as in the most elevated acts. So our duty is seen in everything that we do. It also says that people's inner duty is left to their free will, right? We are not imposed anything. Even our duty, we're not imposed, right? We always have the choice whether or not to fulfill our duty, to action towards our duty or not. So we have our free will. And then he points out beautifully about our conscience. Where does our conscience fall into this? He says that the sting of conscience, the guardian of inner rectitude, warns and upholds them, but it is held back, often powerless before the sophistry of passion. So there are a couple interesting words here. The sting of conscience. The sting is basically that little knock that our conscience constantly gives us, right? We should call it the guardian of inner rectitude. Rectitude is like righteousness. So our conscience is constantly knocking on our mind, giving us that righteousness, telling us what is right. And it always warns and upholds us. So it warns us about the things that we're doing, and it tries to uphold us to the divine laws. But, there's always a big but here, it is held back. Our conscience, every knock that it does, it's held back. And it becomes often powerless. That knock becomes powerless before the sophistry of passion, right? So when you compare, the sophistry of passion would be, in Portuguese, is our sofismas, or our ego giving in to the passion, right? So when we think about the passion, and when you think about our conscience, he's saying here that our conscience is often powerless when put together with our passion, and we usually give in to the ego, we give in to the passion, and we try to forget our conscience. A lot of times we try to numb our conscience, right, by different means. So that's what we see in the Gospel according to Spiritism. And then Joanna, in a book called Conscience Moments, this book doesn't exist in English, so we had to translate. But she says that the lucid conscience remains vigilant, so it doesn't generate conflicts and suffering for itself. So the conscience remains vigilant, right? So it doesn't fall into those sophistry of passion, because we know that when we fall into these sophistries of passion, we will likely generate conflicts and suffering, right? So our conscience tries to keep us vigilant so we don't fall into those. But again, we have free will, so we will do whatever we really want to. Now, is it worth trying to listen to our conscience? We'll see throughout this presentation, but yes, absolutely. Because Jonah says that knowing our duty, our responsibilities mature, utilizing our experiences to develop more and more our innate abilities, amplifying our area of perception. So if we try to depict this that she's talking about here, so knowing our duty, right, which was what we were talking about, our duty. So by knowing our duty, knowing what we're here for, right, why are we here, what is the purpose, what is our duty here in this lifetime, our responsibilities will mature, right? So we will become more responsible, and in the sense that we will utilize our experiences to develop more and more our innate abilities. So when we understand our responsibilities, we realize that everything that we go through in life is an opportunity for us to develop our innate abilities, is an opportunity for us to bring about, to extract that purity that we have within us, which Joanna calls the innate abilities, right? Our virtues that are still within us in a latent state. So utilizing those experiences to develop our innate abilities, which will only amplify our area of perception, like she talks about here. Amplifying our area of perception, being able to understand, to be able to look towards more of a big picture, right? Understand why we're going through what we're going through. And once we bring this understanding, once we bring this perception, we no longer rebel to those challenges. Instead, we understand the purpose of it, so we walk through it, and we're able to make it useful and purposeful. And still talking about the same book, Joanna tells us to make your earthly existence a heritage of eternal blessings, which is a very beautiful sentence that I saw, whereabouts she's saying, make your earthly existence a heritage of eternal blessings. What are our eternal blessings? Well, we know our virtues are with us for eternity. So when we fully develop a virtue, that means that our virtue is now aligned with the divine laws. So a fully developed virtue is an eternal blessing, because it will be with us for eternity, and it is a blessing because it is in line with the divine laws. So that's the invitation from Joanna, right? Make your earthly existence a heritage of eternal blessings. Make our existence, right, this laboratory to develop our virtues so they can become our heritage, so they can become our eternal blessings. And then she says, the moderation and equanimity of the lucid duty will march with us, providing us with the stimulus and accomplishments without causing tiredness, boredom, bitterness over our feelings and motivation. So there are a couple fancy words here, and moderation is just talking about our moral development, right? Our pursuit and our action towards our moral development. When she says equanimity, equanimity is our mental calmness, it's our composure, our evenness of temper, even especially during difficult situations. And our lucid duty, right? So it's that knowing of the duty, that awareness of our duty. So when we're looking for these, when we're working with these, with our moral development, with equanimity, with our duty, they will march with us, they will be part of us, and that will provide the stimulus and also the success in our accomplishments, without bringing us tiredness, without bringing us boredom, without bringing us bitterness over our feelings and motivation. So we will be motivated to go through those actions, will be stimulated, and we will be able to accomplish the true purpose of the experiences that we go through. And if there are any questions, please just post it on the chat. I try to constantly check it. And again, I apologize, the screen, some slides with a lot of text, it will be tough for you guys to read, but I will try to rephrase them over and over again. So Joanna says that while dormant, the conscience works by automatism, which then amplifies from our instincts conquering reason. When our lucidity is able to process discernment, more of the divine values manifest within us, increasing our capacity to love and serve. So let's talk a little bit about what she's trying to say here. So while dormant, the conscience works by automatism. So here she's referring to our initial states. When we first became spirits, and in our first incarnations, we were led by that automatism, by our instincts, right? Like we see animals do, because our conscience was still dormant. But once we're able to move away from that, to start to awaken our conscience, right? When we became spirits with the ability to think, we're able to start awakening that conscience, right? And that allows us to conquer our reason over our instincts, right? So transform that ignorance from our instincts into reason. And then she says, when our lucidity is able to process discernment, right? At that point, we become lucid beings, right? We started talking about that lucid conscience, right? We're able to process discernment, right? As we start to awaken our conscience, given our conscience has the divine laws, all our discernment is there, right? So as we start to awaken our conscience, we're able to understand what's right and what's wrong, right? And that allows the divine values to manifest within us, because again, we are divine, right? We're created in similarity and image and similarity of God, right? We have the virtues as potentials within us, right? So as we start to have the discernment, as we start to awaken our conscience, we're also awakening and manifesting that divine that is within us, right? Which increases our capacity to love and to serve, with which Jesus was the best example we had of love and serving, because he was truly a manifestation of the divine in everything that he did, because as a spirit, as a pure spirit like him, he had all his virtues fully developed. He was then a true manifestation of the divine, which we all can achieve. So then Alidu, he brings us a couple reflective moments here. So he says, when we're starting this journey of self-awareness, right, the beginning, every individual should perform an evaluation of their own emotions to identify where they are. Because he brings us 5 conscience states. He talks about the dull, the exalted, the indifferent, the obsessed, and the ennobled. So when we're reflecting about our emotions, we will likely fall under a few of these states of conscience, right? And this, like understanding about this, knowing about this, only helps with our self-awareness. It helps us understand who we are, where we are, and where we want to go, right? So when we're talking about the dull, those are the ones that doesn't really register affection, right? Has a really tough time with affection. All our emotions are very rude sensations, still very rudimentary, still in a very primitive way. And then there's also the exalted conscience, which that's where we lose a little bit the sense of direction of proper behavior, right? We're so exalted with emotions that we end up twisting affection. We end up misinterpreting affection, and this exaltation, this exalted emotion only distorts our discernment. It only hinders our ability to see our discernment. Then you go into the obsessed. So the obsessed, it's not spiritual obsession. It's simply when we're obsessed about something, right? Or like super, like the passion is a lot. So we're really obsessed about a thing or a person and so on. And that Alidu even says that manifests really close to hallucination. And this is when we talk about hedonism. This is the person, those of us who in everything that we do to seek pleasure. That's what the hedonist is, right, is that person that is constantly looking for that pleasure fulfillment. And that becomes such a drive, right? Such an obsession that every time we want to find more and more pleasure, which becomes a very unhappy person, a very sad person, and very lonely. Um, because a lot of times that eagerness to find that passion might go over people, might go over their feelings, not care about them because they're in this incessant or in this obsessed, I wouldn't even call it journey, but this obsessed, reckless path of finding this pleasure at all cost. And then we have the indifferent, and the indifferent is that one that is almost the opposite. It ignores all the emotions, right? And that's rooted in the person who was looking for pleasure before, but none of those pleasures were fulfilled. Everything that they wanted was never fulfilled. And so because of that, they've now become indifferent to feelings. They've become indifferent to feelings of their own and to feelings of others. And that indifference is really, really dangerous because it can lead to losing the will to live, right? When we're indifferent towards so many things in life, we can lose the will to live, and that could eventually lead to suicidal thoughts. And then we have the fifth kind of or state of conscience that a leader brings us, which is the ennobled one, right? So the ennobled conscience, or the conscience that has the conscience that is noble. That's what the word means, ennobled. It's that person that understands their conscientious duty, right? Understand why they're here, what they should do, and because of that, when you reach this ennobled conscience, everything that we want to do are things that will bring us this moral development, that will bring us, that will touch our essence, right? It won't be something just for passion, just for pleasure, but it'll be actually something that will enrich our lives as immortal spirits, right? And so those are the different states of conscience that Elidio talks about. And then he brings us a reflection. So he says that in the natural scale, through all these consciences, levels of conscience, and towards enlightenment, it is very valid to reflect on a couple points. The first one is, how do I react with myself, right? And this is a very careful analysis that we should be doing with ourselves, with honesty, right? Understanding that we're not perfect beings, that we are apprentices of life, and being an open book with ourselves, with no masks, trying to hide any feelings or any actions or reactions. And this is where we talk about, do I usually feel jealousy or pain or sadness or revenge or hatred, right? All those feelings that are still tied to egotistical complexes of superiority or inferiority, right? And this is really important to reflect about, because those feelings specifically, they are usually rooted in something deeper. They're usually rooted in a sense or a feeling of guilt. And we do have a few talks on our YouTube about guilt, how it's usually the source of a lot of feelings that we have, but we just don't see it. So do we feel any of those, right? Always remembering the honesty in this reflection. Another reflection that we can do here about ourselves is when I go through those feelings, right? When I'm going through jealousy or pain or hatred and revenge and things like that, what happens with me, right? Do I give in to that feeling and just keep going at it, or am I able to calm myself down, right? And am I able to, in a way, to welcome that feeling, but also to calm myself down, realize that's not the way, and then start to transform it, right? Do I lash out, or am I able to calm myself down, right? And that's a sign that we're working towards that ennobled conscience, right? We haven't got there yet, but we're working towards that. And the second reflection a leader brings about is, how's my conduct towards others, right? Am I constantly trying to play like psychological games with people? Am I trying to influence others? And am I trying to change their minds? Am I trying to impose my truth unto them, right? Am I always suspicious of people, that they're going to do something bad to us? It's that lack of belief in people, right? This all stems from a personal insecurity that is quite exacerbated, right? And that responds through what Alito calls a lack of control of emotions, right? When we have a tough time controlling our emotions, right? That's usually that insecurity that brings about within us. So those are a couple of reflections about my conduct towards others. And then the last one is, how do I develop my inner values, right? What am I doing about it, right? Am I trying to achieve, right, a state where I'm free from demands or excuses, right? I don't try to demand myself to be perfect, and I don't excuse myself from every mistake that I make, right? Is that something I'm working towards? Or am I still in the pretending to be of who I am not, right? Am I able to dissolve my passions, right? Am I able to dissolve the resentments that I have, right? And in doing so, I recognize that every relationship I go through is a great opportunity for empathy, is a great opportunity for us to learn. It's a great opportunity for self-awareness, right? A lot of times we see ourselves having some reactions when we're close to certain people, right? Reactions that we usually don't tend to have, but when we're close to some people, they just know how to trigger those reactions, right? So that's a great opportunity for self-awareness. It's a great opportunity to understand, oh, I still have that reaction within me, right? What is it that I should be doing to try and transform that away, right? Understanding that every relationship has the potential to enrich our lives, right? It's up to us to find that richness in relationships. And then Alito says that the tranquil individual, right, with its self-confidence, is natural and spontaneous, right? Open to relationships, respectful towards the ideas and behaviors of others, while not renouncing their own, either through masking them to please or showing off to impose. This thing is really important that Alito brought to us here, mostly on the last two lines, right? Talking about ourselves, right? Our beliefs. How do we see those beliefs, and how do we use those beliefs within others, within people? Do I try to hide my beliefs so I'm pleasing others, right? So I'm always agreeing? Or am I trying to impose my beliefs unto others? Am I trying to make them believe they must understand what I'm trying to get across, and they must take my side, right? They must believe in the things that I believe in because I have the right way. So those two are two movements of our ego. First one is the masked one, right? You're trying to please people, so you basically hide who you are. And then the other one is when you're trying to impose yourselves onto others. That's the evident ego. That's the ego actually lashing out. Whereas in the middle, we find sincerity, we find honesty, where we're not trying to please, we're not trying to penalize. We're being sincere, exposing our thoughts, exposing our ideas, without the notion of either trying to please or trying to impose into anybody. Right? That's what Elidio calls the tranquil individual, with the self-confidence that comes from self-awareness. And we are going to be talking about, sorry, there's one more slide. There's Joanna from, to finish, to talk about discernment. Now, we've talked about conscientious duty a lot, and now we'll be moving to focus more on discernment, when she tells us that the discernment highlights the exercise of the art of thinking, which should grow in the way that favors mankind around the be or not to be, the right or the wrong, the just and the abominable. So it's the importance of thinking, the importance of reflection for us to reach that discernment. Right? She says there's two aspects. One is to always think, and then the second one is what to think. Right? So it's trying to motivate ourselves to always think. Right? Don't let us be our attention or our concentration be lost, or us being taken over by sleep and things like that, right? So that all things are trying to prevent us from thinking, right? Occupying ourselves with problems of others, so we don't have time to think about our own ego, our own self-awareness, right? So what are we trying to do with our minds? Are we trying to always think? Or are we trying to find ways to divert our attention? And then if I am always thinking, what to think about, right? What to think about. And this is what Joanna tells us that brings our discernment, right? Is to always cultivating the importance of thinking about ourselves, thinking about our egos, thinking about our virtues, again, with a lot of honesty, right? So those two can like Joanna says, can be the exercise towards the art of thinking, which will only highlight our own discernment. So I have 15 minutes left, and we'll now be talking about the parable of discernment, which is a passage in Luke, and I want to invite you all to see that this passage is very symbolic, right? Where Jesus invites us all those who wants to be his disciples, to enter a path to become conscientious beings, capable of discerning between what we should and should not do. So this is the parable. It's called the parable of discernment, and it's in Luke chapter 4, 1 through 13. He says, this is also known as the parable of the temptation, or when Jesus was tempted. So Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, left the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness, or into the desert, as we see in some other translations, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. He ate nothing during those days, and at the end of them he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone." The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant of all the kingdoms of the world. And he said to him, "I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. If you worship me, it will be all yours." Then Jesus answered, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil led him to Jerusalem and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down from here. For it is written, He will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. And Jesus answered, It is said, do not put the Lord your God to a test. When the devil had finished all his tempting, he left him until an opportune time. So now, this is the parable, and we will be talking a little bit about three passages here. And this is a long text from the Genesis, and the only, not the only purpose, but one of the main purposes of this text that we see in the Genesis from Allan Kardec in chapter 15, given to us by John the Evangelist. He was talking specifically about this parable when he said Jesus was not actually taking, but only wanted to enable men and women to understand that humans are subject to failure and that they must always be on guard against evil inspirations. The temptation of Jesus is an allegory, right? It's not like Jesus was tempted by the devil, because Jesus, as a pure spirit, he no longer has an ego, so he can no longer be tempted, right? He is a full manifestation of the divine. So this parable is an allegory for us to understand that we can and will be tempted quite a few times by our ego, because we still have them. And I mean, let's be honest, we're still on Earth in a planet of trials and expiation. So a lot of us are still driven by our ego. And that's why we're constantly tempted. So let's move on to the actual interpretation of the parable. So he says, the devil said to him, if you are the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread. And here's the first temptation. And it talks about the feeling of privilege. So when the devil is a representation of our ego in this interpretation that we're doing. So the ego is telling us, right, the Son of God, tell this stone to become bread. And this is, why does it bring us the feeling of privilege? Because this temptation is telling us to do something impossible. It's telling us to change a stone into bread, right? So by doing something impossible, we are thinking that we are privileged because we can do something that's impossible. And to help us understand a little bit more of this, if we do this, right, are we falling into this temptation? We can ask ourselves, how do we pray? Right? Are we praying for God to get rid of something for me? Right? Are we asking God, get rid of my anxiety, get rid of my fear, get rid of my anguish, and so on? This is a feeling of privilege, because we're asking God to get rid of something that we ourselves created. Right? The anxiety that we have, the fear, the anguish, all that we created unto ourselves because of our decisions, because of our past and current actions, right? So by asking God to get rid of us, to get rid of all of those for us, is a sense of privilege. Now, the being that's self-aware, right, the conscientious being, it asks God for strength to help them overcome their bad inclinations. So we're asking for the strength to overcome, not the privilege to have freedom without effort. Right? So those are two different things. The second one is, if you worship me, it will all be yours. And absolutely, Sonia is bringing us, there is no transformation without self-reflection, right? And absolutely, like we talked about in the beginning, if I don't know something, if I don't understand something, I can't change it, right? So it is through this self-reflection, it is through understanding and knowing more about us that we'll be able to transform us, right? And then if we go back to the parable, when the devil says, if you worship me, it will be all yours. So this is the second temptation, right? Here's the ego tempting us, promising us all the pleasures of the world, which talks about superficiality, right? So this is where Jesus invites us to reflect about superficiality, right? Are we giving in to the ego just to find those superficial things? How are we leading our lives? How are we living our lives? Are we staying superficial, or are we actually trying to unlock our conscience? Are we trying to achieve that pursuit for moral development? Right? So that is the second temptation. And why so many temptations? Well, because changing is tough, right? Change is not easy. Changing of habits requires a lot of exercise, and that is those constant temptations, right? Is our ego telling us, no, I don't want to change, can I just stay as we are, right? But then when we are truly focused on our moral development, we say no to that superficiality and try to change and to evolve. And the last portion of this parable is when the devil says, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. They will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. And this is from Psalm 91. So this is the devil that's telling Jesus this allegory. He's saying, Jesus, right there at the very top of a temple in Jerusalem, and he says, Jesus, jump. Because it's written in a psalm that he will command his angels concerning you to guard you carefully. So jump, because it's written on a psalm that you'll be protected, right? An angel is going to come and carry you. And that is the third temptation, which is called the belief in the infallibility, right? That we are infallible, right? That we can simply do whatever we want, and then just ask God to come clean it up, basically. So here is when we have that feeling of we're now bringing together all these three temptations, right? We have the temptation of asking for anything, right? Asking for the impossible, because we feel this privilege. So it's the feeling of the privilege, is the feeling of superficiality, and these two combined give us the belief in the infallibility, right? When I think I can ask for anything, and my superficiality will only guide me to ask for superficial things, like jumping off a cliff, this will bring this infallibility sense that I can do whatever I want, that God will simply help me. And not help me, but it'll actually protect me and not let me, in this case, right, jumping off the high point in Jerusalem, falling, and then waiting for the angels to come and rescue him. So this is a distorted view of spiritual support, right? This belief in infallibility is putting the angels as our servants instead of our instructors, right? Those are very different things. And understanding, right, why do we have guardian angels, right? Why do we ask? Why do we pray, right? Are we asking for Jesus or for God or for our guardian angels to be our servants, or are we asking them to be our instructors, to help us understand, to instruct us what the right way is, and to give us the tools, as they already do, to evolve ourselves, for us to do the work, right? So this is portrayed by the prayer that pleads the angels and the saints to solve our problems, right? Wanting to be privileged, wanting to be infallible. Like the angels will do everything to us and we don't have to do anything, right? So that is a very distorted view of the spiritual support. And to end, I want to bring a few passages from Jesus, right? Like we've been saying today, that he is there to instruct us, to support us, to help us in this journey, and he came to show us how to walk about, how to go through this journey. So we'll just bring a few passages from Jesus when he told us that very truly I tell you, whoever believes in me will do the works that I've been doing, and they will do even greater things than these. Right? So Jesus is just such a consoler here, telling us that if we believe him, right, if we are developing our virtues, if we're following his advice, if we're following the divine laws, we can do everything that he did and even more, right? So this parable of temptation, when Jesus excelled at, right, he didn't give in to any of temptations. This parable, this in John 14, telling us that we can do everything that he did and even more, right? It shows us that we can say no to those temptations. We are able to do that, right? Just like he did. And then always the invitation, right? Especially when you're talking about discernment, right? Watch and pray so that we will not fall into temptation. Again, talking about the support from Spirit, right? The support from God, from Jesus. Watch and pray so we do not fall into temptation. Jesus wasn't telling us watch and pray so that temptation is taken away, right? But it's so we do not fall into temptation, right? Bringing that sense of responsibility, but also this sense of the help that we can get from him to guide us, not to carry us, but to guide us, right? And then in Matthew 22nd, when he says, for many are invited, but few are chosen, we can think about it as our talk today, right? Many are invited to unlock their conscience, to awaken their conscience, right? Through this journey of self-awareness, right? But how many of us actually choose to do that? And if we choose, do we actually do it, right? So it's not like we're being chosen by Jesus as you are the privileged one, so you're going to have your conscience awaken. No, this is a process that we go through. We choose ourselves as disciples of Jesus. Like he told us in John 13, right? His new commandment when he said, love one another as I have loved you, right? And that's an indication of Jesus' disciples. So as we're going through this journey, right, asking for Jesus' support, if we're ever doubting his support, in John here, he told us, love one another as I have loved you, right? He truly loved us, so he will always help us, right? And if we're looking to love one another, including ourselves, and asking for his support, we have the magic recipe there. So Jesus is always there to support us because, like he said, he loves us very dearly. So that brings our talk to an end, and I apologize for the issues with the technology. We're a little late because of that, but thank you again for participating. And it looks like there are no questions, so I thank you for your participation, and we're just going to end in a little prayer, reminding everybody that tomorrow at 7 we have our talk in Portuguese. So thank you for participating, and I invite you to pray with me. So dear Lord, dear Jesus, we were able to see today so many passages from your teachings. You told us that we can do everything that you did, and that we can do even greater things. You taught us to watch and to pray. You told us that we can be chosen. in every invitation that you make us. And you taught us, and you truly taught us to love one another because you truly loved us. So thank you, Jesus, for all this love, for all this guidance, and for all this comfort that you bring to our lives. And please help us more and more work towards our own development, knowing ourselves who we truly are, and understanding that we do have the potential to become as good as you are to us. Thank you, and so be it. Thank you all again, and I wish you a great Sunday and a great end of your weekend, and we'll see you again shortly. Thanks.